Elina never believed in the old superstitions of her village. Do not sweep at night, her mother and grandmother always warned her, but she only laughed, brushing it off as nothing more than folklore, until one fateful night when she ignored their warnings and picked up her broom under the silent glow of the moon. At first, everything seemed normal until she heard a whisper calling her name from the darkness. Strange footprints appeared in the dust. Her family was struck by misfortune, and every man who wished to marry her mysteriously vanished without a trace. When she finally came face to face with a figure with glowing red eyes, it was already too late to turn back. What really happened that night? Could there be a way to break the curse? And were the ancient taboos just superstition or a serious warning passed down from the ancestors? Watch until the end of the story to uncover the shocking truth. Do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss another chilling tale. Elina was known throughout the village of Bantu for two things: her beauty and her obsession with cleanliness. While other girls spent their afternoons weaving baskets or playing near the river, Elina could always be found sweeping. She swept the house, the yard, the tiny path that led to their doorstep, even the classroom at school before the morning bell rang. To her, keeping everything spotless was a sign of discipline and responsibility. But there was one rule that her mother, Adisa, and grandmother Moji always warned her about: never sweep at night. They repeated the warning every time they saw her with a broom after sunset. It is bad luck. You will sweep away our blessings. You will disturb those who walk at night. Elina always laughed, shaking her head. Mother, grandmother, I love you, but these are just old village tales. Nothing will happen. It is just a broom and dust. One evening, after a long, tiring day at school, Elina returned home to find the yard covered in dry leaves and dust carried by the evening wind. She sighed, grabbed her broom, and without a second thought began sweeping. The night was calm, eerily calm. There were no sounds of children playing, no distant chatter from neighbors, not even the usual rustling of trees. The silence was thick, heavy, as if the air itself was holding its breath. As she swept, she heard something faint, a soft whistle slithering through the air. She paused, straightening her back. Who is there? She called out. Silence. She shook her head, laughing at herself for being so jumpy, and resumed sweeping. Swish, swish, swish. Then a whisper. Elina. She froze. The broom slipped slightly from her fingers, but she tightened her grip. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Mother, grandmother, is that you? She called, stepping cautiously toward the house. No response. Her breath felt heavy, but she pushed the fear aside. It is just my mind playing tricks on me. She continued sweeping, determined to finish quickly. Then something cold brushed against her ankle. A sharp gasp escaped her lips as she looked down. There was nothing there. She swallowed hard and tossed the broom aside, rushing into the house. That night's sleep did not come easily. The following days, strange things began to happen. The oil lamp flickered violently every time she reached for her broom, though there was no wind. The flames stretched unnaturally high, casting eerie, shifting shadows on the mud walls. One night as she swept near the back of the house, she heard a humming sound. A woman's voice, melodic yet haunting. She turned, expecting to see her mother or grandmother standing there, but she was alone. Then came the footprints. One evening after sweeping, she noticed them, long, deep, unrecognizable. They were not human, not animal, just there as if something unseen had walked through the dust. Things got worse. Her mother's stall at the market, once bustling with customers, suddenly emptied. People whispered about bad luck avoiding her home, as if it carried a curse. At school, Elina found herself struggling to read, words blurred on the pages, and numbers no longer made sense to her. Teachers scolded her for making mistakes she had never made before. One evening, her best friend Yetunde pulled her aside. Elina, please listen to them. Stop sweeping at night. Something is not right. Elina waved her off, rolling her eyes. Yetunde, you sound just like my mother. Yetunde grabbed her hand tightly. Then explain why you always look exhausted, why your mother's business is failing, why people are avoiding your house. Elina, don't be stubborn. Elina opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Deep inside, fear had started to creep in. The real terror, however, was yet to come. Elina tried to ignore Yetunde's words, convincing herself that everything was just a series of coincidences. But the more she tried to brush it off, the more the strange occurrences escalated. One evening, as she sat with her mother and grandmother eating dinner, The flames of the oil lamp flickered again, stretching unnaturally high. The room darkened as if a shadow had passed over them. Elina shivered and glanced at her grandmother, who had stopped eating her spoon frozen midair. "Elina, have you been sweeping at night?" her grandmother asked, her voice low but firm. Elina hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "Yes, grandmother, but it is just sweeping, nothing more." Her grandmother slammed her spoon onto the table, making Elina jump. "Foolish girl, do you think the world is only what your eyes can see? Do you think that just because something has not happened yet, it means it never will?" Her mother, Adisa, placed a gentle hand on her grandmother's arm, trying to calm her down. "Mama, please." But the older woman shook her head. "No, Adisa, this girl is playing with things she does not understand." That night, Elina lay in bed, wide awake, staring at the ceiling. Every creak, every whisper of the wind outside made her tense. She tried to push her grandmother's words from her mind, but they lingered, haunting her like an echo. Then it happened. A soft tap at her window. Tap, tap, tap. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded. She turned slowly, staring at the window across the room. The night was dark, but she could make out a faint outline, something or someone standing just beyond the thin fabric of the curtain. She sat up, gripping her blanket tightly. "Who is there?" Silence. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Taking a deep breath, she reached for the lantern beside her bed and lifted it. The dim glow cast long, eerie shadows on the walls. Slowly, she stepped out of bed, her feet cold against the clay floor. She hesitated for only a moment before pulling the curtain aside. There was nothing there. A shiver ran down her spine. She let out a shaky breath and turned back toward her bed. But just as she did, a whisper floated through the air, so close it felt like someone was standing right behind her. "Elina." She spun around, but the room was empty. Her hands trembled as she placed the lantern back down and crawled under her blanket, pulling it up to her chin. She closed her eyes tightly, praying for sleep to come. But sleep did not come easily. The next morning, she told herself it had been her imagination, a dream, nothing more. But deep inside, she knew something was wrong. Over the next few weeks, life in their home worsened. Their livestock fell sick, goats bleated in distress, cows refused to eat, chickens stopped laying eggs. Elina's mother lost more customers at the market until eventually she could barely sell anything at all. The whispers in the village grew louder, people avoiding their home, crossing the street whenever they passed. And then the suitors stopped coming. Elina was of marrying age, and she had always been admired by many young men in the village. But one by one, each man who expressed interest in her would suddenly change his mind. Some left the village entirely, others claimed to have had nightmares warning them away. It was then that Elina began to feel the weight of fear pressing against her chest. She had always laughed at her mother's warnings, ignored her grandmother's wisdom. But now she could not ignore the way the air in their home felt thick, how shadows seemed to move on their own, or how she would wake up each night with the feeling that something was watching her. One evening after another failed proposal, her grandmother sat her down. "Elina, you have disturbed something that should not have been disturbed." Elina looked at her grandmother, eyes wide and filled with something she had not felt before. True fear. "What do I do, grandmother?" Her grandmother studied her for a long moment, then whispered, "Pray that it is not too late." Elina could not sleep that night. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind like a cold warning. She no longer dared to touch the broom, yet the feeling of unease never left her. It was as if someone was always watching her, even when she was just sitting still inside the house. One night, a strong wind suddenly swept through the village, carrying eerie whispers. Everyone shut their doors tightly, extinguished their oil lamps, and prayed. Inside Elina's home, her mother sat curled up by the fire, while her grandmother murmured ancient prayers. But Elina could not close her eyes. She felt like someone was calling her name from outside. She slowly stood up and walked toward the window. The cold wind seeped through the cracks in the door, making her shiver. And then she saw it. A tall, shadowy figure stood outside in the yard, silently staring into the house. Its eyes glowed red like embers burning in the dark. Its form was cloaked in thick, shifting smoke, constantly changing as if it did not belong to this world. Elina felt her knees weaken. She stepped back, almost screaming, but her grandmother's voice rang out behind her. "Do not be afraid. It cannot enter unless you allow it." Elina turned around to see her grandmother standing there, her old eyes filled with understanding. "Grandmother, what is that?" Elina's voice trembled. Her grandmother stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "It is the spirits you have disturbed. They have been waiting for you." Elina shuddered. "What must I do?" Her grandmother sighed. "There is only one way. You must beg for forgiveness." The next morning, her grandmother took Elina to see the village elder, a man known for his deep understanding of spirits and ancient traditions. When he heard Elina's story, he simply nodded slowly. "I have been expecting you." Elina's breath caught. "You knew about this?" The elder looked at her with eyes that seemed to see through her soul. "The spirits always give warning before they strike, but you still have a chance." Elina knelt down. "Please tell me what to do. I did not know I was breaking a sacred rule." The elder studied her for a long moment before speaking. "You must perform a ritual. You will need to bring 3 white pigeons, a gourd of palm wine, and a handful of ashes from your family's hearth. Then you must go to the ancient tree in the forest, where the spirits dwell, and ask for forgiveness." Elina swallowed hard. "And if they do not forgive me?" The elder closed his eyes. "Then you will belong to them forever." A cold shiver ran down Elina's spine, but she knew she had no other choice. That night, under the dim glow of the moon, Elina carried the offerings and ventured into the forest. She walked alone, her legs trembling with fear. When she reached the base of the ancient tree, she knelt down, placed the offerings before her, and closed her eyes. "I am sorry. I did not realize the gravity of my actions. Please forgive me." She waited. The wind howled through the trees, creating a chilling sound, but there was no response. She opened her eyes, and then she saw them. Dozens of glowing red eyes flickered in the darkness. Shadowy figures surrounded her, not touching her, but also not leaving. A voice echoed through the air, deep and hollow. "You disturbed us." Elina clenched her hands, but she did not dare to run. "I am sorry. Please, let me make amends." The shadows seemed to shift. A strong gust of wind blew through, nearly extinguishing the torch she held. Then the voice spoke again. "Leave, and never make this mistake again." Suddenly, the air around her felt lighter. The shadowy figures faded away, leaving only the wind and the rapid beating of her heart. Elina did not hesitate. She gathered her belongings and ran straight home. From that day forward, everything began to change. Her family's misfortune lifted, and her mother's business flourished again. Suitors returned, and there were no more broken engagements. But most importantly, Elina never swept at night again. She learned a hard lesson. Some things cannot be explained by logic alone. Not all taboos are mere superstitions. Sometimes they are warnings passed down through generations to protect people from forces beyond their understanding. What do you think about this story? Do you believe ancient traditions hold hidden truths, or are they just myths meant to scare children? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow for more mysterious stories.